to give just some house rules before I introduce our speaker, Guy Hoffman, today. What I'd like you guys to do is after you show your faces, please let's conserve bandwidth by everybody turning off your cameras and going on mute. And that way we'll be able to listen to Guy Hoffman. The way we're going to do this today is we're going to try to encapsulate this in half an hour. We're going to allow Professor Hoffman to explain something of the work that he does at Cornell. Perhaps if there's time for him to talk about his passion of how he became an engineer, which all of you can relate to. And then he's asked to give about 10 minutes at the end for all of you to be able to ask questions. So Thomas, I see you're joining us from London as well. Welcome. And so other viewers will start joining, but I'm going to start the recording now. And let me ask you to just put yourself, turn off your videos because it takes the biggest bandwidth and your voice. And I'll start by introducing our speaker. Very well. So today we're honored to have Guy Hoffman, who's an assistant professor and a Mills Family Faculty Fellow at Cornell's Sibley School of Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering. He works in the field of human-robot interaction. He has studied computer animation and acting in addition to computer science and human-robot interaction. Robots that interact closely with humans should be less like chess players and more like stage actors or musicians. That's what he maintains. They should know how to closely mesh with humans, be able to take chances and improvise. Maybe they even need to be able to make mistakes. Given that for many years, the big selling point for robots has been their ability to perform tasks quickly, correctly, and predictably, robot improvisation and imperfection is a radical idea. Hoffman, for you guys who want to know something of his background, he grew up in Germany and Israel, and then he came to the United States after earning his master's degree in computer science from Tel Aviv University in 2000. After stints in film production, cell phone network technology, data visualization, and animation, he applied and got accepted to Cynthia Brazil's personal robotics group at the MIT Media Lab. And from there, after working on humanoid robot, he felt strongly that a robot does not have to look like a human to make good companion. So Hoffman went off and decided to create these robots that surprisingly mimic devices that are not human-like. He believes that that people value flexibility even in a robot if it can be delightful and surprising. When describing the kind of graduate student that he would like to have in his lab at Cornell, Hoffman says that there is no single profile he is looking for. I see myself as an educator as much as a researcher, and you can teach any skill, but you can't teach curiosity and passion. These are the essential ingredients for any graduate student I am looking for. Students who have always strived to push their own boundaries of comfort. With that introduction, I'd like to stop now and turn this over to Professor Hoffman to hear some words from him.
Thank you so much for this introduction. It's great to speak to you today. As we said, I'm going to try and sort of keep my remarks to about 15 minutes or so now, so we can have at least 10 minutes of you being able to ask any questions or have a discussion that includes more of us. I will share my screen here, and I will sort of, because of the way that I can share.
You have headphones.
Oh, Anahita's here. Excuse me, sorry for that.
Hello, yes, I am. Sorry, I'm currently on a boat, so it's a bit hectic for me, but I am here. Yeah.
Anahita's one of your biggest fans, guys, so please.
Yes, I am. I mean, I spent 2 months working on something inspired by you, I guess.
Well, it looks like you're in a fun place, more fun than the rest of us.
Anahita, you may want to just conserve the bandwidth by hiding your video, and you can listen.
Yeah.
Same with a boss.
So,
a boss, you can do the same. You can just hide your video and listen.
And can you enable screen sharing so I can share my screen?
Oh, yeah. I guess you should be able to do that on your side. By
no, you need to enable it, Jose.
Oh,
on the
okay.
share
Now,
screen.
okay, forgive me. Let me do that. And
We're not regular users of Zoom.
okay. Okay, I think I just did that, Guy. Can you try?
Yeah. Looks okay. Let me see.
Oh, great.
Let's see. Should be able to see
We can.
the screen.
We can see.
So I'm going to have this sort of like in like slide mode, just so I can scroll through while I'm showing things to you. So here's where I am right now. This is Ithaca, New York. It's upstate New York. It's Cornell University. Looking over this lake, and we have beautiful surroundings and waterfalls. But very soon, this is what my life is going to look like because it's very cold. My lab is called the Human Robot Collaboration and Companionship Lab. And we study sort of a bunch of different things around human robot collaboration and companionship. Most specifically, our AI that has to do with human robot collaboration and design. And also, we do studies in human robot interaction to understand how people and robots interact. I want to focus, because of this audience, because of the kind of work that you've been doing over the last few months, I wanted to focus on some of the design aspects. And again, I'm going to sort of like move back and forth. But over the years, if you look sort of over the last, it's coming on like 16, 17 years, I've been thinking a lot about how to design social robots. And here you can see a number of different robots that I've designed. And probably some of the more well-known one are the robotic desk lamp and the music playing robots, whether it's the jazz playing Shimon robot that I worked on with Gil Weinberg at Georgia Tech, or smartphone speaker robots. So I want to talk a little bit more about the later design projects that were inspired by the same principles. And the principles are really thinking about movement as the main expressive medium for the robot. So you can think about a robot that interacts with people as having a number of different ways that it can express its internal state, that it can move, and it can communicate with people, for example, through text on the screen, through a face that changes, through the way that it looks. It could also just be, you can understand something about the robot just with the way it's shaped. So I know that one of the projects that Jose mentioned to me was the vacuum tube radio as a companion for older adults. And here, part of what you're communicating is you're communicating through the way that the thing looks. You're communicating through light. Also, in your case, where you have the different tubes use patterns of light, and similarly, we've used this in the robotic desk lamp. But I was always very interested in movement, coming from my background in animation and coming through my very short studies in acting. I definitely cannot say that I studied acting or theater, but I was always very interested in how movement can in itself express something even without a specific shape. And so the motivation that has driven a lot of these robot designs is that we're designing the robots while we're thinking about movement. So it means that when we're thinking about a robot that ends up being this type of device, really it started out by thinking mostly in a very abstract way about what are the parts that move with respect to each other. I want to, so one of the examples which I am now not found. One of the examples which I wanted to focus on is this conversation companion. And here, this actually was supposed to be like a completely like an egg-shaped and blob-shaped robot, where it has an internal mechanism that you can see here. It has sort of like a crane-like mechanism that can, it's a bunch of linkages that can move with respect to each other that would distort the shape of the robot. But as we were working on the physical mechanism that will enable the movement of this egg or blob-shaped robot, we kind of got enamored with the actual way that this mechanism in itself, the way that it moves, expresses things. So we ended up scrapping the whole exterior part of the robot and decided to build a robot that was basically demonstrating this particular internal mechanism and the fragility that comes out of it. Also, this robot was supposed to express some sort of fragility to people. And why is that? the original idea for this robot was that we wanted it to be a conversation companion for couples who are in conflict. And so this actually came out of a study of couples conflict, and in psychology, people have found that when couples argue and they are in a sort of like a non-constructive conflict state, the presence of a child or the presence even of a picture of a child can change their behavior to be more compassionate towards each other, because they are worried about the fragility or the emotional fragility of the child. So we were thinking, can we make a fragile robot? And this goes along with what Jose was mentioning before about robots. Rather than being, robust and reliable, what about if robots are actually fragile? And so we designed this companion, which ended up focusing very much on its fragility. So you can see, for example, that the way that part of its body is made out of paper. So this paper kind of communicates this idea that it's easily destroyed. And one of the linkages, you can see it very, very barely here. I might kind of like zoom in here. Is actually held up by a thread that's as thin as the dental floss, but not as strong as dental floss. And when you are around this robot, you really feel that this robot can like fall apart at any point. Let me show you a little bit like what it looks like when it's in movement.
The robot has 3 emotional states: curious, calm, and scared, and will react depending on the volume and tone of conversation.
Oh, he will get curious. He'll sort of lean forward and try to listen more.
Yeah. So we're going to try it out now.
You scare it.
Hey!
But quickly gets scared and shakes when we're angry.
That was pretty scary. Yeah.
And part of this idea is not just the movement, also the materials themselves. They give an additional layer to the movement. For example, when you move paper, you get the specific sound that you get when paper rustles against each other. When you shake a thread, then you get all these waves in the thread. So rather than thinking just about a motor moving a rigid object, this is kind of the first place where we really explored how the material that the robot is made out of can contribute to what it's communicating through its shape and through its movement, in this case, fragility. And the next robot I would like to talk about in this context is a robot called Vio. And Vio came out of a collaboration with a home electronics company, SK Telecom. And they said we wanted to make, so like you've probably seen these in ads or on some websites, home assistant robots, so like an Internet of Things, a robot that can help you turn on your lights, turn off your oven, make sure that your clothing iron is disconnected when you leave the house. And they had a really clear idea of what they wanted, and what they wanted was this this type of humanoid butler that you could talk to, and it could give it commands. But we decided to take this design into a completely different direction, where we thought about sort of a little bit more theoretically about what are the things that make a robot a certain interactive participant. And one of them is the morphology, is what I talked about, just now, the idea of the shape, the materials, and how it just looks when it's not moving. The second is the nonverbal behavior, which is the movements. Like, how are the movements designed? What do the movements tell us about what the robot is trying to communicate? And the third are these interaction schemas. How do you interact with a robot? Talking to a robot is one thing, but it has its own sort of, cultural and psychological baggage, if you wish. Typing into a computer is another way to interact. So we're kind of looking at these 3 questions throughout the design process over and over again, and came up with a design that had some very specific intentions. And here's an early sketch of this robot Vio, and it was actually very much inspired by a microscope, because one of the things we wanted to say through the morphology of the robot is that the robot is not its own entity that's separate from you or from your house, but it's really, you should think about it more as a tool through which you control your house. And this is something that was sort of a first maybe critique of this idea of robot companions, rather than what if you just had robotic tools, and so you could take a companion and shrink it down to make it a bad companion, which is like a robot, or you can take a tool like a microscope and make it come alive, and suddenly you have this device that's becoming more than what it could be, more than a microscope. I want to show you just a quick way of how this robot works, and then talk about the interaction schema. can see it has somewhat of a companionate look, but also it transforms back and forth from being just a tool where you're just looking through it at what's going on in your house. Each of the devices in your home is represented by an icon. So if you put an icon there, in this case electricity, you can turn it on. Then as you're changing the position of these, you can sort of see how what you're doing affects the and if you go back to the idea of interaction schema, we see that in this case, interaction schema is completely nonverbal, so you don't talk to the robot. You give the robot things, and you take things away from the robot. You move things around the robot's space, and therefore communicate things. And think about it as if you leave something on a desk for somebody you live with, and you say, okay, here are the keys. You just put the keys somewhere, and by this indicate these keys, can be taken, or you want to place something at an important place in your home to communicate that this is something that you care about. And so in this case, we wanted to, in the design process, to explore this idea of placing objects as an interaction schema. And then the next robot I would like to talk about is Blossom, which is after Bio, I've been thinking a lot about different materials. Here you can actually see an exploration. This is sort of something that never came to fruition, but we were trying to make a wooden version of Bio, so the same robot but made completely out of wood. And I've always thought that the materials have a lot of expressive capabilities. And I was getting more and more disaffected by robots always being made of this like white plastic and black glass and including my own robots. And I was thinking, what if we completely sort of change the sort of standard thinking of what a robot should look like and what a robot is, and maybe it doesn't have to be like a rice cooker or a little astronaut. And instead, we were thinking about making a robot that's much more made out of soft materials and has flexibility. And some of these ideas you can see they're already existing in the Kip robot, the one that was sort of fragile and shaking. Another thing that I've been thinking about a lot around this project was the question of craft. Who makes the robot? Who owns the robot? What makes a robot that is yours, special to you? And around that same time, I think overall in the last 10 years, I would say maybe a little bit less, people have been fascinated with this idea of craft, from having, craft beer breweries to people picking up craft as a hobby, which was supposed to be much more of a hobby for older people, has become now something that, not just children and old people do, but people get fascinated by printing their own cards and, making their own furniture. And so I had this idea in my head, it kept bugging me as this concept. What if you can make a robot that's like a craft object and it's not a mass manufactured object? Because all of these designs speak of mass manufacturing. It's something you would make in a factory. But what if you make a robot by hand? And so I learned a new craft for me. I learned to crochet. I learned how to make fabrics from strings by using knots. And we started working on this sort of craft robot. Here are some sort of very simple prototypes of just having something crochet with some wood sticking in, and an original version of this was actually in a flower pot. But out of this came Blossom. And Blossom is a robot that is made out of craft materials for the most part. You can change the way that it looks by making your own exteriors or using your own materials, and you can also create completely different morphologies just by the way that you design it. The second thing that Blossom has is that it's made out of soft materials. So obviously not this wood, but the exterior is soft and the interior is also soft. So inside there are no more linkages at all. We took this idea of Kip to sort of the next level and made everything inside being completely based on tensile components. So everything is suspended by rubber bands, pulled by strings, and as a result of these of this mechanism that doesn't have any rigid attachments, as you can see here, we get this very unusual motion for a robot where it can sort of bend and nick and have all of these very organic looking movements. And we have sort of continued to develop this robot. We have taken pretty much all the plastic parts out and have replaced them with wood and cardboard. And we're now trying to make a version that you can completely make at home. And we've also made this into an open source project that anybody can just download the parts and make their own version of it, and then go to the sewing machine or take knitting needles out and make their own robot. And since then, people have made a lot of different versions of this robot, and we've seen it sort of pop up on YouTube and other research labs to really explore this idea of having a robot that's no two of the robots are the same, which is kind of counterintuitive to this idea of robotics. So to summarize, so we still have a few more minutes for questions and answers. What I want to emphasize is that in the way that I think about robot design, there are a few things that are really dear to my heart. The first of them is that movement is the main thing. Pretty much none of my robots ever had a touch screen, or I think only one, which was a collaboration, had a face on a screen. I really think that if you're using the right materials and the right structure and the right movements, you can create an engaging companion that doesn't need to have all these very high bandwidth interaction capabilities like typing, touching, video, faces, and all these things, which I think put the robot more in a device category rather than sort of an emotional or engaging category. The second is that the robot doesn't have to look a certain way. A robot can be its own thing. I think actually the less it looks like something that you can recognize, the more you might be willing to give it the benefit of the doubt and allow it to be its own object. And so with these two thoughts, I want to leave you, and I would love to hear your thoughts and your questions and anything else I can answer at this point.
That's wonderful. I'm just going to leave the students to ask questions. Any of you who want to unmute and show your face, you can ask a question.
Let's try to show your faces, and then we can, if the bandwidth gets bad, we can sort of dial that back. So I can.
Do we still have Anahita? She's still around?
Yes, I'm here. I was going to ask, where do you, if you had to think of a way to kind of make your work relate to the stuff that Kin-Keepers is looking at, like the radio and stuff, how would you think about it? How would you do it?
So I'm not sure I completely understand your question, but the way I've seen the design for the Kin-Keeper radio, and I think it's actually very ingenious because you are using existing metaphors, you are using existing object, and I think taking an object and developing it into something that is more than, rather than taking something that's big like a companion and making it less than, is really the right approach, because this way you can start from something that is familiar, but you can sort of think about it as the next level of this particular type of object, in this case the radio. The way I would think about it is also what does a radio represent? What is the radio in a person's life? How is it used, and how does it play into a person's routine? So radios have had an interesting history. They appeared sort of early in the 20th century, and they became the first mass media. Really, it was really the first time that you had real-time mass media. And if I think about my grandmother, who was born before, who was kind of pretty old before there was any radio, she was in her teens. And for her, it was the first time that she could witness something that is happening somewhere else. Then you have other cultural associations with radio, for example, around in the US, especially the driving culture. And when you think about radio in the US, it's very much associated with a car, and with being alone, and with having something to connect you to the larger world. So I think if you take a metaphor like this, a physical metaphor, you should also take into consideration all of the cultural, circles and contexts around that metaphor, and how this might play into the interaction schema that you choose for your particular device.
I have a question too, Guy. Do you ever incorporate artificial intelligence into your design? Any artificial intelligence software?
In the design process, or in the actual robot itself?
In the actual robotics, I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, all these robots had an AI component in their interaction. In this talk, I was really focusing only on the design process of the physical robot. But the song playing robot, the speaker dog, would do rhythm recognition and could generate music on the fly using neural network. The robot, the Kip robot, was using sort of pattern matching to try to recognize different phases in a conversation to know when to react in certain ways to help the couple gain a better way to converse with each other. And Blossom now is using AI to try to generate its own gestures automatically using generative neural networks. So we use AI in the software level of all of these robots. Yeah, I was trying to focus more on the design process here.
Any other questions?
What do you see yourself working on next?
I don't know. I can tell you what I'm working on right now. The thing that I'm most excited about right now is thinking about the workplace. So almost all of my work so far has been around the home, and I've been thinking much more in the last few years about the workplace. And there's this, the way that robots are entering the workplace is again, there's sort of like a lot of standards thinking, whether it's factory robots or manufacturing robots, or whether it's service robots that are in stores to try to upsell you when you go into a store, if we ever go back to stores again. And we've been sort of thinking a little bit more creatively about what does it mean to have a robot in your workplace, and not necessarily in a factory workplace, but in any of your workplaces. Could a robot help you do your work better? And specifically, one of the things I'm interested in is people who make decisions and creative decisions. How can the robot help them make creative decisions? So this is what I'm working on now.
Well, I hope we have also, yes, it's nearly up. I hope we have actually inspired you to think about the elderly who have special needs in their own right.
Yeah.
And very often they are lonely. We are trying to build a companion for them as well. But in that context, I wanted to ask you, we are also very critical of touch screens or keyboards. This is totally unsuitable for a senior person. But what do you think about the voice interface? None of your robots seem to have they have a video, they can look and make decisions on what they see, but none of them seem to have a voice interface.
I mean, there's the pragmatic question, which is really, it has never been the focus of my work, and you kind of have to choose something that you're focusing on. And dialogue and natural language was really never a part of what I was interested in personally. Maybe it's because I don't like to talk very much myself, and I'm projecting this on my robots. But I think we have seen that voice interfaces are very useful, and have become, from an esoteric research question to an omnipresent interface options. So I'm definitely out of the loop for that. But it's not because of any principle of that not being a good interaction. I think it's awkward in larger crowds.
Sure.
And I think the question is really, I think some people feel very comfortable with voice interface and others don't. So I think it's also very much a personalizable question of whether a particular person feels comfortable talking to a robot, and if not, what are their options of doing other possibilities of interacting.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, we are sadly out of time. We only have about 30 seconds left on the call. I just want to thank Professor Hoffman for taking the time to address us and sharing with his research with us, inspiring those of you who are trying to become engineers in the field. And I will tell you, there are about 4 of us on the call who are from Cornell, and we can confirm, as Guy Hoffman will know, that hell indeed does freeze over in Ithaca, New York. So
every year.
Every year. So think about that if you're thinking of going to Cornell. Thank you all for joining. Thank you very much, Guy Hoffman, and we'll have this recording for those of you who want to look at it later.
Thank you.
I want to know, Anahita, where are you? Where sailing?
Me, we've just anchored off Aberystwyth in Wales. Yeah, we've been sailing non-stop from Cardiff, so it's been quite exciting, really. There's a gorgeous sunset as well.
All right, this is this is the life we should lead. Lecture: how do you get to sail? All right, thanks a lot. It was fun talking to you guys.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Hey, Guy, thank you.